I had mentioned in my review for Dune Part 1 that while I liked that movie, I didn't really have any desire to watch it again, but I kind of wish I had before I went to go see Part 2. I couldn't really think of something quippy to say for the intro, but this was something that occurred to me that I wish I had rewatched the first one. Not that you absolutely need to in order to follow along with the events of part 2, but it wasn't fresh. You know, I'd seen the first one back in 2021 when it came out, and I rewatched my review, refreshed my memory as to some issues that I had with it, some things I liked about it, some things that just stood out to me as little niggling problems, and some of the same things that I mentioned in my review for part 1 carry over to part 2, and I'll get to that in a minute. I'll start off by saying that I think I like this one more than the first one. Not that I dislike the first one, but I'm going to lay it out there again for you guys like I did for my other review. I'm not a big Dune fan. I don't know much about the world, about the characters. While I can follow the overall plot, some of the intricacies are a bit confusing to me, especially some of the family connections that are revealed in part 2. And while I did enjoy the first one, and I enjoyed this one as well, I really don't have a burning desire to rewatch these movies. This is a film that's really going to appeal to fans of Dune, especially I think hardcore fans of Dune, and people who really like hardcore, there's hardcore twice, sci-fi, heavy sci-fi. This is heavy sci-fi. It feels very cerebral. There's so much going on with it. The world is so deep and so full, and it's just so expansive. And while I do think that Denis Villeneuve did a good job at, I guess, condensing the material down to a handful of hours of viewing time, it still felt like there was a lot that was left unsaid. And I'm not sure if he's got a longer cut of this, but I'm wondering if a couple of the issues that I have with part 2 would be rectified with a longer cut. Now, this is a hefty film. It's 2 hours and 45 minutes. Obviously, okay, credits, so let's say 2 hours 35 to 38 minutes long. It's pretty long. I wasn't really bored. It was a little more actiony than the first one, but it was something that took its time. Part of me enjoys that it took its time, because I feel like if it had been condensed much more, it would have felt a little bit rushed. But at the same time, I feel like I'm talking out of two sides of my mouth when I say this, because I wasn't bored, but I was very conscious of the fact that it was taking a bit of time. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's weird. When I watched my review for part 1, I had forgotten about this, but so it was 2021. COVID was still a thing for some people, or their fears of COVID was still a thing. And I was reminded that I'd mentioned something about that I hoped that it would do well, that it would perform well at the box office, that people wouldn't be afraid to go see it. I had forgotten that I mentioned that, but I do recall that Dune Part 1 wasn't a huge blockbustery event at the box office. I think that's going to be different this time, because we've got 3 years, almost a 3-year span in between the release of Part 1 and Part 2. So people's fears have abated somewhat, or quite a bit, hopefully. And I think this is going to do much better than the first one. Some of the same stuff that I enjoyed from part 1 holds true with part 2. The cinematography is gorgeous, beautiful. The action scenes are choreographed pretty well. The score, oh my gosh, the score. I had forgotten who did the score, but when I was sitting there as the credits were going, and I was thinking to myself, I bet it's Hans Zimmer. I bet he did the score. I just kind of feel like it is, and sure enough, it was. I have had this score going in my brain ever since the movie, and it won't leave. Anyway, the score is great. Please excuse my attempt to present the score to you. Standout for me as far as acting, the acting in general was good. The standout for me, Austin Butler. I can't remember that guy's name. Austin Butler was so freaky wicked in here. And I don't know how much of that was just down to his acting or his looks, because the bald head and in some of the lighting, it almost looked like it was reverse infrared or I don't know, it was weird. When they were outside, he was just like bone white. And then when he was inside, it was normal. I don't know what that was about. I remember hearing it being talked about how they did that, but I don't remember why. I don't know if it's is it because on Arrakis the sun's so bright? I don't remember this being a thing with the Atreides family looking this way. So I don't know. Maybe it's just the oh gosh, what's the name of that family? The Harkonnens or whatever. So yeah, Austin Butler stand out for me. He was really good in here at playing a really bad person. Something I completely forgot to mention, I had written it down in my notes, and it's regarding Austin Butler's performance. I had indicated something in my notes about how he was able to make his voice sound like the character in the movie that he's supposed to be related to, and fans of the books and whatever, they'll know who I'm talking about. But I didn't notice it until a little ways into the film, and I was thinking, wow, he sounds very similar to this character, like he's from the same place. And it was just fascinating to me what an excellent job he did in immersing himself or his voice, his vocal talent into this role. He just did a phenomenal job. And in addition to the acting part of it, I also wanted to point out or mention or highlight the vocal aspect, the voice aspect of what he did. It was just very impressive work. Okay, back to the video. Zendaya, I'm not a fan of Zendaya. She wasn't overly obnoxious in here. Her presence didn't destroy the film or anything like that, just like it really didn't in the first one, but that's mostly because she wasn't in there much. Zendaya does not play a fierce badass convincingly. She had certain scenes where she would get this scowl and she's supposed to be she was all scowly and she was fierce and she was angry looking, and that was cringe. That didn't work for me at all. I kind of rolled my eyes when she would do that. She's most convincing in this movie when she played or when she was portraying emotions of concern or fear or worry, things like that. I don't know. She didn't win me over at all, but she was okay. Florence Pugh's not really in here a whole lot, and neither is Christopher Walken. I guess if I had any complaint with regard to the content that was in here, it feels like we were a little bit shortchanged on those characters, and maybe there could have been some moments in the midst of scenes with where Paul is with the, oh gosh, what are the names of those people? What are those people? I can't remember what they're called. The people he's out in the desert with. Maybe some of those scenes could have been trimmed down a bit. Certainly some moments took their time playing out, and then there were other moments where there were these weird editing, not necessarily glitches, but weird editing cuts. There were two that jumped out at me specifically. I can't remember now what the second one was, but the first one, there's this moment in time where his character is supposed to go out and spend some time in the desert to kind of prove himself or whatever. And instead of focusing on him spending any amount of time out there, all of a sudden there's a cut, and the next thing you know, there's this ambush thing happening and he's involved in the ambush. That jumped out at me to the point that I wrote it down. And then, like I said, I noticed one other instance. This makes me wonder if there is a longer cut of this, and if so, whether those events wouldn't be an issue anymore with a longer cut. I don't know, complete speculation. There was some really cool effects with some of the things that the machinery would do. There's a scene where these people go to jump from the ground up to the top of this really high rock or sort of mountain, and they have these almost like these gliding sort of things, and that was really cool how that was done. Another thing that was really cool that I enjoyed was the sandworms, and those things are really gross, and I can only think of one body part when I see them, especially the front of them. But there are scenes where they're riding on the sandworms, and that's really cool. That's really well done, because I could see that an effect like that many years ago would probably look really cheesy and terrible. I have seen clips of the '84 movie where he's on the sandworm, and this was just done in such a way that it looked convincing. It looked real. It looked like, yeah, I could see that totally happening. And so, yeah, that was cool. When I rewatched my review for part 1, I had mentioned some stuff in there already, things that I've touched on here, the cinematography and the acting and things like that. But something that I noticed in this one as well was an issue in the first one too. I had mentioned that in the first one, the score overpowered the dialogue at times. And then there would be times where maybe there wasn't really a significant score happening, but you still couldn't hear the people clearly. There were a couple of times, especially one crucial point, where something important was said and I had no idea what it was because the voice was not clear. I even wrote down that I said the audio was blurry. It was the best way I could think to explain it in the dark, typing on my phone. And this was a thing in the first one as well. It was like, it just wasn't, like sometimes it felt like there was a muffle or their voices were being muffled. It was really strange. It wasn't as much of an issue, I don't think, in this one. And the score didn't really overpower the dialogue like it did in the first one for me, but it was enough for me to notice. And so I don't know if I'm the only one. I don't think I was the only one when the first Dune came around. I thought I saw articles or something or people talking about it, but it was still a little bit of a thing in here. In the first Dune, the climax, a lot of the actiony stuff had already happened well before the movie ended. So it felt a little bit anticlimactic at the end. This one feels a little bit more proper. There's your normal, 3-part type of segmenting in the story, and then you have this climax that happens, and in that sense it felt a little bit more satisfying. But as with the ending of the first one, the ending of the second one certainly leaves the door wide open to a possible sequel, and I hope it happens because I would like to know what the rest of the story is going to be. Obviously, I could go and I could listen to the books, read the books. I'm not going to do that. I have no interest in listening to or reading the books, but I'm curious to know how the story ends. And I know there's multiple books in this series, so if I were a betting person, I would say that a third movie is definitely going to be greenlit. There were a lot of things that were left wide open because the complete story arc is not done. And I would like to see where we end up with some of the characters as the story goes forward, what's going to happen overall with this war that is looming. And so I guess we'll see. I feel more hopeful that a third one's going to happen than I was when the first movie came out, because it didn't perform spectacularly at the box office, and yet a second one was greenlit. So surely a third one's going to be. I mean, this director is really good. I don't think I've ever seen a movie of his that I absolutely hated. Now, I've not necessarily been super in love with all of the things of his that I've watched, but I don't think I've ever seen anything of his, unless I'm just completely blanking out. I don't think I've ever seen a movie of his that I have just inherently hated. So if this franchise is going to be in the hands of any director, I feel very confident that he's going to continue to do a really solid job as the story progresses, if that's going to happen. I think it will. That's all I think I have to say about Dune Part 2. I'm curious to know how you guys feel about this movie. I'm pretty confident in the expectation that fans are really going to enjoy it, but if I'm incorrect about that and there are fans of the book series that just hate this, let me know. Let me know either way. I have some burning questions about some family connections that I would like answered, but I'm not going to talk about that here. Maybe you guys can explain it to me in the comments. Anyone who's read the books, knows the source material, will know what I'm talking about when I say confusing family connections. It was confusing to me. I think that's it. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. We'll see you guys later. Hasta luego.